The morning fog hung low over Riverside, turning the streets into something from a forgotten painting. Inside the Riverside café, warmth battled the October chill through the scent of fresh bread and dark roast coffee. Nina Carter moved between tables with practiced grace, her apron stained with the evidence of 1,000 busy mornings. Her smile came easily, even when exhaustion pressed against her bones like an old familiar weight. At 32, Nina had learned to carry burdens without complaint. Her mother had passed 3 years ago, leaving behind medical bills that still haunted her mailbox. Her father had vanished when she was 12, a ghost she stopped searching for long ago. Now, it was just her and Owen, her 14-year-old son, whose sketchbooks filled with building designs reminded her daily why she kept fighting. Owen worked in the kitchen after school, washing dishes and learning to bake from Mrs. Patterson, the cafe owner. He couldn't hear the clatter of plates or the hiss of the espresso machine, but he felt the rhythm of the place through vibrations and watched people with an artist's careful attention. His hands moved in fluid signs. When he talked to his mother, telling stories about customers and dreams about college, the cafe sat on the corner of Maple and 3rd, a brick building with large windows that let morning light pool across worn wooden floors. Regular customers knew Nina by name. They asked about Owen, left generous tips, and sometimes stayed just to keep her company during slow hours. It wasn't much, but it felt like family. When the door opened that Tuesday morning, bringing with it the smell of rain and autumn leaves, Nina looked up from refilling the sugar dispensers. A man entered, shoulders hunched beneath a faded jacket that had seen better seasons. Dark stubble covered his jaw, and a small scar traced his right eyebrow. He moved with the careful steps of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. He chose a corner booth, away from the morning crowd of commuters and retirees. Nina approached with her notepad, offering the same warm smile she gave everyone. "Coffee," he said quietly, his voice rough from disuse. "Just black, please." She poured his cup and set it down gently. He wrapped both hands around it, as though drawing warmth from more than just the drink. His eyes, a deep brown that held layers of untold stories, flickered to the window where rain had begun to fall in steady sheets. Nina returned to her work, but something about the stranger lingered in her thoughts. He sat perfectly still, staring at nothing, looking like a man who had misplaced himself somewhere along the way. The morning crowd thinned. Mrs. Patterson called out orders from the kitchen, while Owen hummed tunelessly, scrubbing pans in the back. The cafe settled into its comfortable mid-morning lull, the kind of peace that made Nina grateful for small mercies. Then Victor Hale walked in. Victor owned 3 car dealerships in the county and believed his money bought him the right to speak however he pleased. He wore expensive suits that never quite fit his personality, and his voice carried the sharp edge of someone accustomed to being obeyed. He scanned the cafe with the predatory focus of a man looking for weakness. His gaze landed on the stranger in the corner booth. Victor approached the table, his footsteps heavy with intention. Nina's stomach tightened. She had seen this before. The way powerful people found satisfaction in reminding others of their place. "Excuse me," Victor said, his tone dripping false politeness. "This establishment is for paying customers. If you're just looking for a place to camp out, there's a shelter 2 towns over." The stranger looked up slowly, his expression calm but weary. "I ordered coffee." "I'm a customer," Victor smirked, glancing around to make sure others were watching. "Right. 1 cup of coffee for 3 hours. That's loitering where I come from. Maybe you should move along before I call someone who can help you understand." The cafe fell silent. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the espresso machine seemed too quiet. Nina felt every eye in the room turned toward the confrontation, waiting to see how it would unfold. The stranger said nothing. He simply returned his gaze to the window, refusing to engage. The silence itself felt like defiance. Victor's face flushed. He reached out and grabbed the back of the stranger's chair. "Hey, I'm talking to you. You think ignoring me makes you invisible?" Nina's hands trembled as she set down the coffee pot. Every instinct told her to stay quiet, to let it pass, to protect her job and avoid trouble. Something deeper stirred, a memory of her mother's voice saying, "The world changes when good people stop being silent." She walked forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Mr. Hale," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "He's a paying customer. He has every right to be here." Victor turned, surprise flickering across his face before hardening into irritation. "This doesn't concern you, Nina. Get back to work." "It does concern me," she replied, her voice growing stronger. "This is my section, and he hasn't done anything wrong. You're making other customers uncomfortable." The room seemed to hold its breath. Owen appeared from the kitchen, his eyes wide with worry. Mrs. Patterson stood frozen behind the counter, a dish towel clutched in her hands. Victor stepped closer to Nina, lowering his voice to something cold and threatening. "You're making a big mistake. Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are," Nina said, meeting his stare without flinching. "And that doesn't give you the right to treat people this way." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then someone near the window pulled out their phone, recording. Victor noticed, his expression shifting from anger to calculation, straightened his jacket, forced a tight smile, and stepped back. "Fine," he said through clenched teeth. "Enjoy your charity case." He strode toward the door, pausing only to add, "You'll regret this." Nina, small towns remember. The door slammed shut behind him, and slowly the cafe exhaled. A woman at the counter whispered, "Good for her." An elderly man nodded approvingly. Owen rushed over and signed, "Are you okay?" Nina's hand shook as she signed back. "I'm fine, just doing what's right." She turned to the stranger who sat watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Gratitude, perhaps, or something deeper, like recognition. "Thank you," he said softly. "You didn't have to do that." Nina managed a small smile, though her knees felt weak. "Yes," she replied. "I did." He studied her face for a long moment, then extended his hand across the table. "James," she shook it, feeling the calluses on his palm. Nina outside. The rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean. Inside the Riverside café, something had shifted, something small but profound. Neither Nina nor James knew it yet, but that single moment of courage had set in motion a story that would change both their lives forever. By evening, the video had spread across social media. A stranger had captured the entire confrontation, posting it with the caption, "Waitress stands up to local bully defending homeless man." Within hours, it had thousands of shares. By midnight, Nina's name trended online. She sat at home that night, Owen asleep in the next room, scrolling through comments that ranged from supportive to vicious. Some called her brave. Others accused her of staging the incident for attention. A few suggested she should mind her own business. Nina closed her phone and stared at the ceiling, wondering what tomorrow would bring. She had stood up for a stranger, and now the world was watching. The question was whether she had the strength to face what came next. The following days unfolded like a strange dream Nina couldn't wake from. The video had taken on a life of its own, shared and reshared, until her face appeared on local news segments and internet blogs. Reporters called the cafe asking for interviews. Strangers recognized her at the grocery store, some offering congratulations, others whispering behind their hands. Mrs. Patterson handled the attention with nervous laughter, but Nina could see the worry in her eyes. The cafe had become a spectacle, with people showing up just to see where the viral moment had happened. Some were genuine supporters. Others came with cameras, treating the place like a tourist attraction. Victor Hale didn't return, but his absence felt more threatening than his presence. Nina heard through the town gossip that he'd been making calls, using his influence to remind people who held power in Riverside. Two of the cafe's regular suppliers suddenly raised their prices. The landlord mentioned something about reviewing the lease terms. Nina tried to focus on her work, pouring coffee and taking orders, while the weight of being watched pressed down on her shoulders. Owen stayed close, his protective instincts sharpened by the attention his mother received. He signed to her during quiet moments, asking if they would be okay. She always answered yes, even when doubt gnawed at her certainty. James continued to visit the cafe, always choosing the same corner booth. He spoke little, but Nina found comfort in his steady presence. Sometimes she caught him watching her work, his expression thoughtful, as though he were solving a puzzle only he could see. Then the gifts started arriving. The first package, appeared on Nina's doorstep on a Thursday morning. A simple brown box with no return address, just her name written in neat block letters. Inside, she found a collection of high-quality art supplies, the kind Owen had circled in catalogs but never dared to ask for. Sketchbooks with thick paper, professional pencils, charcoal sets, and watercolors that gleamed like jewels. Owen's hands trembled when he opened them, signing over and over. Where did these come from? Nina had no answer. The card inside read simply, "For the architect who will build better tomorrows." 2 days later, an envelope arrived containing a check for $2,000 and a note that said, "For the medical bills." No one should carry that weight alone. Nina stared at the check until the numbers blurred. Her hands shook as she set it on the kitchen table, afraid to touch it, afraid it might disappear. Who would do this? And how did they know about the bills that kept her awake at night? More gifts followed. A grocery delivery she hadn't ordered, filled with fresh produce and quality ingredients. An anonymous payment to the café that covered an entire month's worth of utilities. Each time the notes were brief and unsigned. Offering help without demanding gratitude or recognition, Nina felt a mixture of overwhelming relief and unsettling confusion. She wanted to find the mysterious benefactor, to thank them, to understand why anyone would care so much about a stranger's struggles. One evening, as she locked up the cafe after closing, she found James waiting outside. The October air had turned cold, and his breath formed small clouds in the lamplight. He wore the same faded jacket, but something in his posture had changed. He looked less like a man hiding and more like someone preparing to be seen. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice quiet but steady. Nina glanced back at Owen, who was finishing the dishes inside. She nodded, pulling her sweater tighter against the chill. They walked to the small park across the street, where a single bench overlooked the river. The water moved slowly beneath the bridge, reflecting scattered lights from the town. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the night sounds of Riverside settling into sleep. The gifts. James began looking at his hands rather than at her. "They're from me." Nina turned to face him, surprise washing over her. But how did you know about the bills, about Owen's dreams?" He smiled sadly. "I've been watching this town, listening. It's what you do when you're trying to disappear. You notice things. You see who struggles quietly and who helps without asking for praise." She studied his face in the dim light, seeing past the worn appearance to something else underneath. "Who are you really, James?" He took a long breath, as though gathering courage from the cold air. "My full name is James Thornton. 5 years ago, I founded a tech company called Thornton Innovations. We developed autonomous navigation systems for vehicles and industrial equipment." Nina's breath caught. She remembered the name from news reports years ago. "It's the headlines about a tragic accident," James continued, his voice thick with old grief. "We rushed a prototype to market because investors pressured us, because I wanted to prove we could change the world. The system malfunctioned. A delivery truck using our technology crashed into a school bus. His hands clenched into fists. 3 people died. A teacher named Rebecca Mills, and 2 children. 7-year-old twins, Emma and Lucas Wright." Nina felt tears prick her eyes, not for the tragedy alone, but for the weight she could see crushing him. "The lawsuits destroyed the company. The media destroyed my reputation. They were right to. I had prioritized profit over safety, ambition over caution." James looked up at the sky, where clouds obscured the stars. "My wife, Catherine, couldn't handle the guilt by association. She left. My parents stopped speaking to me. I became the face of corporate greed and negligence." He turned to Nina, his eyes glistening. "So I sold everything I had left, gave most of it to the victims' families, and disappeared. I've been moving from town to town for 3 years, trying to figure out if there's any way to make up for what I've done." Nina sat quietly, processing the revelation. The stranger she'd defended wasn't homeless or helpless. He was a man haunted by his mistakes, carrying guilt that had become his entire world. "Why tell me this now?" she asked gently. "Because you defended me without knowing anything about me. You risked your livelihood for a principle, not a person." He met her gaze fully. "That kind of courage is rare. And I wanted you to know that the money I'm giving you isn't charity. It's the only meaningful thing I can do anymore. Help people who actually make the world better. Nina felt her throat tighten. The gift suddenly made sense, not as pity, but as purpose. A man trying to rebuild his soul, one anonymous act at a time. James, she said softly, what happened was terrible. But hiding forever won't change it. At some point, you have to forgive yourself enough to live again. He laughed bitterly. How can I forgive myself when those children never got to grow up? You can't bring them back, Nina replied. But you can honor their memory by becoming someone who prevents future tragedies. Use what you learned. Teach others. Be honest about your mistakes so they don't repeat them. James looked at her with something between hope and disbelief. You don't hate me? I hate what happened, she said carefully. But I don't hate you. I see someone who's suffering, who's trying. That counts for something. They sat in silence, the river whispering below. Finally, James spoke again. I want to help you renovate the café. Really, renovate it. Make it something special, a place that can support you and Owen properly. Nina started to protest, but he raised a hand. Not as charity, he said. As partnership. You've shown me that kindness still exists. Let me help you build something that proves it to others. She considered his offer, weighing pride against practicality. Owen needed stability. The cafe needed repairs she couldn't afford, and James needed something to anchor him before he drifted away completely. Okay, she said finally. But we do this together. You don't just write checks. You show up. Work. Be part of this community. James nodded, a genuine smile breaking through his usual somber expression. Deal. Over the following weeks, they transformed Riverside Caf. James worked alongside Nina and Owen, stripping old paint, refinishing tables, updating equipment. He proved surprisingly skilled with his hands, explaining that he'd grown up helping his grandfather restore furniture. The townspeople watched the renovation with curiosity. Some recognized that the quiet stranger had money, judging by the quality of materials being used. Others simply appreciated that the old cafe was getting new life. Mrs. Patterson, who'd been planning to retire and sell the place, instead offered to sell it to Nina at a price she could afford. With James quietly covering the difference, they renamed it the River's Edge. Honoring the view and marking a fresh start, Owen designed a new logo. A simple sketch of a coffee cup with steam rising to form the outline of a bridge. It represented connection, his mother explained. How small acts of kindness build pathways between people. During the renovation, Nina and James developed an easy friendship. They talked while painting walls, sharing stories about their childhoods, their fears, their hopes. James told her about growing up in Boston, about his love for classical music and terrible jokes. Nina shared memories of her mother, her worries about being enough for Owen, her secret dream of maybe going back to school someday. One afternoon, while installing new light fixtures, James slipped and nearly fell from the ladder. Nina caught him, and for a moment they stood close enough that she could see gold flecks in his brown eyes. Her heart did something unexpected, a small flutter she hadn't felt in years. She stepped back quickly, covering her confusion with a laugh. You're supposed to be a genius engineer. Can't you handle a simple ladder? He grinned sheepishly. Apparently my talents have limits. Owen watched the exchange from across the room, signing to his mother later. You like him? Nina's cheeks flushed. He's a friend helping us. That's all. But Owen just smiled knowingly, the way teenage children do when they see truths adults try to hide. The River's Edge. Opened on a crisp Saturday morning in November, the cafe gleamed with fresh paint, new equipment, and hopeful energy. Nina wore her best dress, her hair pulled back with a ribbon Owen had picked out. James stood beside her as they unlocked the doors, letting in the first customers. The turnout exceeded expectations. Neighbors came to support Nina. Strangers arrived after seeing posts online. Even some of Victor Hale's friends showed up, their curiosity overcoming their loyalty. Throughout the day, Nina moved through the crowd with joy lighting her face. Owen served pastries he'd learned to bake, pride evident in his careful presentations. And James, wearing a simple button-down shirt, made coffee with surprising skill, chatting easily with customers who had no idea who he really was. As the sun set, casting orange light through the windows, Nina stood behind the counter and looked around at the cafe full of life and laughter. She caught James's eye across the room. He raised his coffee cup in a silent toast. She smiled back, feeling something fragile and precious growing in her chest. For the first time in years, the future felt less like a burden and more like a possibility. But neither of them knew that the peace they'd built was about to shatter. Because secrets, no matter how carefully buried, have a way of surfacing when you least expect them. And the world beyond Riverside was about to remember. James Thornton, in the worst possible way, December arrived with the first real snowfall, transforming Riverside into something from a postcard. The river's edge thrived through the early winter, becoming more than just a cafe. It evolved into a gathering place where people lingered over coffee, where Owen's artwork decorated the walls, and where James had slowly begun to rediscover what it meant to be part of a community. Nina had stopped checking her phone obsessively for negative comments. The viral video felt like ancient history, replaced by the simple rhythm of daily work. She woke early to prep the kitchen, opened the doors at 6, and spent her days surrounded by the comfortable noise of conversation and clinking dishes. Owen had made friends with some of the regular customers, teaching them basic sign language while they taught him about music through vibrations and rhythm. James had become a fixture at the cafe, arriving before dawn to help with the morning rush and staying late to handle repairs or bookkeeping. He'd rented a small apartment above the bookstore down the street, his first permanent address in 3 years. Sometimes Nina caught him staring out the window with that faraway look, but those moments grew less frequent. He laughed more easily now, his smiles reaching his eyes. They'd fallen into an unspoken routine that felt dangerously close to something neither dared to name. James brought Owen books about architecture and famous buildings. Nina saved James the corner booth and his favorite blueberry muffins. They took walks by the river after closing, talking about everything and nothing while snow drifted down around them. One evening, as they sat on their usual bench watching the frozen river reflect moonlight, James reached for Nina's hand. She didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined naturally, as though they'd been doing this for years instead of weeks. "I never thought I'd feel this again," James said quietly, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Like I belonged somewhere. Like I deserved to be happy." Nina squeezed his hand. "Everyone deserves a second chance, James. Even you." He turned to face her, his expression vulnerable in the lamplight. "Nina, I need you to know something. What I feel for you, it's real. It's terrifying and unexpected, but it's the most honest thing I've felt in years." Her heart hammered against her ribs. She'd been trying to ignore the growing feelings, telling herself it was gratitude or friendship or anything except what it actually was. But sitting there with his hand in hers, she couldn't pretend anymore. "I feel it too," she whispered, "and that scares me more than anything." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the admission hanging between them. Then James leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met in a kiss that tasted like hope and coffee and the possibility of healing. When they finally separated, Nina rested her forehead against his. "Whatever happens," she said softly, "we face it together, okay?" He nodded, wrapping his arms around her as snow continued to fall. Covering the world in white, they should have known that peace never lasts. 3 days later, a travel blogger named Marcus Chen stopped at the river's edge during his cross-country road trip. He'd been documenting small-town cafes, capturing their unique character for his popular social media accounts. The river's edge, with its warm atmosphere and compelling backstory about the viral video, seemed perfect for his series. Marcus took dozens of photos. The interior decor, Owen's artwork, the view of the frozen river, and one particular shot of James standing by the window, afternoon light illuminating his profile as he prepared. Someone's coffee order. Marcus posted the images that evening with an enthusiastic caption about hidden gems in small American towns. Within an hour, Someone commented on the photo of James. Wait, is that James Thornton? The comment sparked a wildfire. People began comparing the photo to old news articles from 5 years ago. The resemblance was undeniable. Within 3 hours, tech news websites picked up the story. By midnight, it had spread to major news outlets. Disgraced tech CEO found hiding in small Colorado town. James Thornton resurfaces after years in hiding. The waitress and the billionaire. A small-town romance or something more? Nina woke to her phone buzzing incessantly. She checked the screen, still groggy, and felt ice flood her veins. Messages poured in, emails, notifications. Every app lit up with alerts. She scrolled through them with growing horror, watching as strangers dissected her life in real time. The articles were brutal. They questioned her motives, suggesting she'd known James's identity all along and orchestrated the original confrontation for publicity. Gossip sites posted side-by-side photos of her before and after, critiquing her appearance and speculating about plastic surgery she'd never had. Comment sections overflowed with judgment. She's a gold digger who played the hero to trap a billionaire. This whole thing was staged from the beginning. Feel sorry for that kid. His mom is using him for sympathy points. Nina's hands shook as she read the words. The cruelty felt physical, like punches she couldn't block. She thought of Owen, still asleep in his room, and wondered how long before his classmates found these articles. Her phone rang. Mrs. Patterson's number. Nina answered with trembling fingers. Sweetheart, have you seen the news? Mrs. Patterson's voice carried concern and something else. Worry about what this meant for the café. I just woke up to it, Nina managed, her voice tight. There are already reporters outside the café. 3 vans. They're asking about you and James? Mrs. Patterson paused. Nina, did you know who he was? The question stung worse than the articles. Not at first, Nina admitted. He told me a few weeks ago. But it doesn't change anything. He's a good person trying to make amends for his past. Mrs. Patterson sighed heavily. I believe you, dear. But I'm not sure the rest of the world will. Nina ended the call and sat in the silence of her kitchen, watching dawn break through the window. She thought about waking Owen, preparing him for what was coming. But her body felt paralyzed by the weight of what she'd lost overnight. Her privacy, her reputation, the simple life she'd worked so hard to build. A knock at the door made her jump. She peered through the curtain and saw James standing on her porch, looking as devastated as she felt. She opened the door. They didn't speak. He stepped inside, and she fell into his arms, finally allowing herself to cry. He held her tightly, his own shoulders shaking. I'm so sorry, he whispered into her hair. I never wanted this for you. I should have left weeks ago. Don't, Nina said fiercely, pulling back to look at him. Don't you dare apologize for trying to live again, but they're destroying you because of me. He gestured toward her phone, still buzzing on the counter. Everything you've built, your reputation, Owen's safety, it's all at risk because I was selfish enough to stay. You stayed because I asked you to, Nina said. Because we both needed this. Whatever comes next, we handle it together. Remember. Before James could respond, Owen emerged from his bedroom, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He looked between them, immediately sensing the tension. His hands moved quickly. What's wrong? Nina signed back, explaining as gently as possible. The internet found out about James. People are saying mean things about us. Owen's face darkened. He crossed to the window and peeked through the curtains. Even from here, they could see reporters gathered near the street. He turned back to his mother, signing with determined movements. We did nothing wrong. They're the ones who should be ashamed. His fierce loyalty broke something in Nina. She pulled him into a hug. Blinking back fresh tears, the day unfolded like a nightmare. Nina called the cafe to say she couldn't come in, unable to face the cameras. James stayed with them, all 3 hiding in the small house, while the media circus grew outside. News helicopters flew overhead. Reporters knocked on doors throughout the neighborhood, offering money for interviews. Nina's phone wouldn't stop. She finally turned it off, but the silence felt worse. She imagined every person she knew reading the articles, forming opinions. deciding whether to stand by her or distance themselves. By afternoon, the café had been forced to close. Mrs. Patterson called to say that protesters had shown up alongside the reporters. Some supported Nina, holding signs that read, "Stand with Nina and kindness isn't a crime." But others carried uglier messages. Gold digger. Fake hero, staged for fame. Owen refused to go to school the next day after a classmate sent him screenshots of posts calling his mother terrible names. He sat at the kitchen table drawing angry sketches, his usual gentleness replaced by barely contained fury. James paced the living room like a caged animal. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," he said. "This is why I stayed hidden. The world doesn't forgive. It just finds new ways to punish." Nina watched him unravel, seeing the guilt consume him again. She wanted to comfort him, but her own pain felt too raw. They were both drowning, and she didn't know how to save either of them. That evening, as darkness fell and the reporters finally dispersed, James made his decision. He found Nina sitting alone in the kitchen, staring at cold coffee. "I have to leave," he said quietly. She looked up, her eyes red from crying. "What if I go? The story dies. They'll lose interest. You and Owen can have your lives back." He crouched beside her chair, taking her hands. "I can't be the reason you lose everything, Nina. I love you too much for that." The words hung in the air, the first time he'd said them, and they came wrapped in goodbye. Nina felt something break inside her chest. "You think running away fixes this? You think leaving makes you noble?" "It makes you safe," he said desperately. "That's all that matters." She pulled her hands free, anger rising through the grief. "You don't get to decide what's best for me, James. You don't get to play the martyr and walk away like that. Erases what we've built. I'm not erasing it." He stood, looking defeated. "I'm protecting it." "Protecting you? By abandoning me?" She stood too, facing him. "That's not protection. That's cowardice." The word hit him like a slap. His face went pale. "Maybe it is," he said quietly. "But at least you'll be safe." He turned toward the door. Nina felt panic rise in her throat. "Don't do this," she said, her voice breaking. "Please don't do this." James paused, his hand on the doorknob. His shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For everything?" Then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him with a finality that echoed through the house. Nina stood frozen, listening to his footsteps fade down the porch steps. She wanted to run after him, to scream, to make him understand that she'd rather face the storm with him than survive alone. But her legs wouldn't move. Owen appeared in the doorway, having watched the entire exchange. He signed slowly, sadly. "He's wrong. Running doesn't help." Nina collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "I know," she signed back without looking up. "But I don't know how to make him believe that." The next morning, James was gone. His apartment above the bookstore sat empty, cleared out overnight. He'd left an envelope taped to Nina's door containing a check for enough money to cover the cafe's expenses for a year and a simple note. "You gave me the greatest gift. Nina, you showed me I could still be human. Now, I need to prove I'm worthy of that gift by becoming someone who doesn't hurt the people he loves. Thank you for everything. Protect Owen. Protect yourself. And please, try to forgive me for not being brave enough to stay." Nina read the note until the words blurred. She thought about the first day James walked into her life, how defending him had seemed like such a simple choice. She never imagined that kindness could lead to this much pain. Over the following days, the media frenzy slowly died down. New scandals captured attention. The protesters dispersed. The reporters moved on to other stories. But Riverside remembered. The town divided itself into camps. Some supported Nina, believing in her integrity. Others whispered that she'd known all along, that she'd used James for his money. The river's edge remained closed. Nina couldn't bring herself to open it, couldn't face the judgment in people's eyes. She spent her days at home with Owen, both of them nursing wounds that wouldn't heal. 1 week after James left, Nina received an email from an address she didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Please watch." She opened it to find a link to a video. Hands shaking, she clicked play. James appeared on screen, sitting in what looked like a simple hotel room. He wore a plain shirt, his hair neatly combed, his face composed but weary. When he began to speak, his voice carried the weight of every mistake he'd ever made. My name is James Thornton. 5 years ago, my company's negligence resulted in the deaths of 3 innocent people. I've spent these years running from that guilt, hiding from responsibility, trying to disappear because I couldn't face what I'd done. He paused, gathering himself. But recently, I learned something important. I learned that redemption isn't about hiding. It's about showing up even when you're afraid. It's about being honest, even when the truth makes you vulnerable. The camera stayed steady on his face. I met someone who taught me what courage really means. Her name is Nina Carter, and she's the bravest person I know. She defended me when I was a stranger. She believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself, and the media has tried to destroy her for it. His voice grew stronger. So I want to make something absolutely clear. Nina had no idea who I was when she stood up for me. She gained nothing from our friendship except harassment and judgment. She's not a gold digger or an opportunist. She's a single mother working multiple jobs to give her son a better life. She's everything good about humanity that the internet tries to tear down. James leaned forward, looking directly into the camera. I'm done hiding. I'm starting a foundation dedicated to product safety and corporate accountability. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure what happened because of my negligence never happens again. And I'm telling this story not to redeem myself, but to protect someone who deserves protection. He paused, his eyes glistening. Nina, if you're watching this, I'm sorry I left. I thought I was protecting you, but I was really just protecting myself from more pain. You were right. It was cowardice. And I promise I'm going to do better. The video ended. Nina sat staring at the blank screen, tears streaming down her face. Owen came to sit beside her, wrapping his arms around his mother as she sobbed. The video went viral within hours. But this time the narrative shifted. People who'd attacked Nina began apologizing. Others praised James for his honesty and commitment to change. The story transformed from scandal to redemption, from judgment to hope. That evening, as snow began to fall again, Nina heard a knock at her door. She opened it to find James standing on her porch, snowflakes catching in his hair. He looked terrified and hopeful in equal measure. I know I don't deserve another chance, he said, but I'm asking anyway. Not because I'm brave, because you taught me that some things are worth being afraid for. Nina looked at him for a long moment. This broken man who'd tried to do the right thing in the wrong way. She thought about forgiveness, about second chances, about how love sometimes means choosing to be vulnerable even when it hurts. She stepped aside, opening the door wider. Come inside, she said quietly. It's cold out there. Relief flooded his face. He entered, and Owen greeted him with a fierce hug that said everything words couldn't. That night, the 3 of them sat in the living room planning the future. James would return to the public eye, using his platform to create real change. Nina would reopen the river's edge, stronger and more determined than before. Owen would continue his art, his drawings now displayed in a permanent exhibit at the local library. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more judgment, more challenges, more moments when hiding seemed easier than facing the world. But they'd learned something crucial. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply show up, be honest, and choose love even when the world tries to convince you it's not worth the cost. As Nina looked at James and Owen, both of them talking excitedly about renovating the cafe's outdoor space, she realized something profound. Defending that stranger months ago hadn't just changed James's life, it had changed hers too. It had taught her that kindness creates ripples we can't always predict, that courage comes in small daily choices, and that sometimes the people we save end up saving us right back. Outside, snow continued to fall on Riverside, covering old wounds with fresh white. Inside, warmth and laughter filled the small house. And somewhere in the space between forgiveness and hope, 3 broken people began to heal together. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning.